this evening. And in the meantime, Roger, I just want to thank you for making the time to come and share all about design thinking with us. As you know, I'm a big fan of design thinking in general, and Roger and I know each other from experiences we both had at Rutgers. But you know, I just personally want to share. You know, I think we're very lucky to have Roger talk to us. He's one of the leading thinkers in design thinking. He, in his spare time, is the acting CMO of Subway because he has such a busy teaching schedule. He oversees a design thinking curriculum at various universities, Harvard, Northwestern, Rutgers, NYU, and others. And I think most of all, what I have liked about Roger is his passion for design thinking and what it can do in healthcare, and how it can lead to better differentiation in everything that we do. And so I think we're honored to have Roger. Roger, take it away from here, and we're really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Arvind, very much. Let me just confirm that all of you are seeing an egg-shaped human with glasses on at the moment. That I'm sorry to say is me, and that is kind of the roster of stuff that I do. I should tell you, Arvind, that I was doing a tour of duty with Subway, who were my client. 5 years ago, I did a design thinking style project for them. They were shrinking in size, stores were closing, they hadn't changed anything, so why would that happen? My team went into the field to stop asking them questions and start asking customers questions. And of course, we discovered what any of you might be aware of if you've frequented Subways, is that they literally have not changed. They are still selling a giant ball of dough with deli meats on it and calling it, you know, the fresh and healthy alternative, because they thought they were competing against McDonald's when the world had changed around them. And so perceptions had changed, as had their quality diminished, because they'd been trying to maintain a $5 foot long past the cost-effective use case. So after telling them what they needed to change, they failed to do so for 5 years and finally called me back in and said, you know what you told us to do, could you just do it for us? So I spent the last year helping to transform Subway, and it's been really interesting how that exercise, which by the way mostly involved just understanding what kind of food you need to deliver, what kind of broader experience you need to deliver, how to be digitally forward in your outreach to the customer, and just achieve relevance to the next generation, and how that applies to so many of my healthcare, particularly provider companies as well. So I just wanted to say that I'm done with that gig. I do teach at a number of places, and it's all in the service of design thinking. Without further ado, let me tell you about people who are really making it happen. This is a really—
Hey, Roger, yes. Can you just give us a little intro to Ampersand before you get into the—
Ampersand is a partnership of professionals who are in this business of applying design to achieve better growth for companies. What you'll see from this presentation is that the application of design theory is effectively about, if you had to summarize it, it's just about putting the customer first. We all have a very, I think, biological imperative, almost evolutionary imperative to put ourselves first. We wouldn't be on the planet if we didn't wake up in the morning and say, I'm hungry, what should I feed myself? It's not until you are in love, probably with a child, that you wake up in the morning and say, I wonder if my child is hungry first. And it's that sort of breakthrough that causes us to be less self-centered, that allows for this design method. But it really is an unnatural act. I think we really are a selfish gene. And much of what I'm going to be telling you today is about how you get beyond thinking of what I make and how I sell it to you, and rather think, what do you need and how can I make that possible? It's a very fundamental distinction in the way that you think, and designers are trained to do that from the beginning. Wendy Perchik is the head of strategy and innovation for Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. You may be familiar with it. It's not far from where Arvind lives on the Upper East Side of New York. It is a Tony area, a little difficult to get to because it's up by the East River. So not a lot of subways on the Upper East Side. But like almost every healthcare center, it is really a vestibule for waiting for things to get done. And unfortunately, for people facing these long wait times in a cancer center, many of them don't have the time to wait. And Wendy Perchik had a pivotal moment in her career when she was walking into her office one day, which comes right through the front entrance of Memorial Sloan Kettering. She has to go kind of past the check-in desk around the corner into the administration area. And a woman who looked a little like this woman with the chemotherapy bandana on her head approached Wendy and said, "Excuse me, are you Wendy Perchik?" And she said, "Yes, I am." Wendy, you should know, by the way, is a 2-time breast cancer survivor herself. So she has a lot of latent empathy for her patients, her customers, if you will. And this woman said, "I just want to thank you for the incredible quality of care that I've received here. And I also want you to know that I will never forgive you for the few days I have left on this planet that I spend in this waiting room." And Wendy and she both burst into tears. And Wendy made sort of a solemn vow to herself that she was not going to allow the patient to come second, because all providers have for all time optimized around the unit of value being the physician. And the physician's time was precious and the patient's time was not. And as a result, everything was organized around the exercise of the professional caregiver rather than the care recipient. She said, "This must stop. If we are truly in the business of humane care, we will show the way." And she knew that there was an obvious area of attack. Lesson number 1, find the easy entry point to make the case. She knows that chemotherapy is a scheduled event. It is largely unmonitored. It doesn't require doctor care. You will have a medical practitioner of some sort, like a nurse practitioner. And so she said, what I'm going to do is target eliminating the wait times for people who are coming in for their regularly scheduled chemotherapy. Seems reasonable. The doctors, who are also the administrators, told her that would be impossible. Our patients require access to their physicians. They'll be, we'll be unable to provide that. How could we make that happen? We have to organize around the doctors. She dropped a stack of paper the size of a phone book on the table and said, "Here are all of the patient chemotherapy visits for the last 3 months." Went through the whole thing. 0 interactions with their primary physician, with their oncologist, because of course it's not required. So false argument solved with data. Next argument. We are on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. People come to us because they care about the prestigious location and service, blah, blah, blah. Bam, she throws down a map and says, here are the locations that are easiest based on the demographics of our customers for them to access. We have found retail space in Brooklyn in what at the time was a pretty low budget area, which is now where the Barclays Center is out by Atlantic Avenue, if you're familiar. So it's become sort of a valuable destination and a hub, but a very easy commuting hub because all the subways sort of intersect there. And she said, we've surveyed our own patients who are in chemotherapy. The vast majority would prefer that location because it's impossible to get here. We're on the Upper East Side, our patients are not. So and by the way, it will save us time, it will save them time, and it will save us money. So she made the case for a prototype just across the bridge in Brooklyn in an area that looked like that. She opened this thing. It used to be a convenience store. She took it over, blew it out. It looks like a gallery. As you enter this thing on the left-hand side, they now have displays of artwork from local artists in the area. You may be able to see on the door, it says Brooklyn Infusion Center, Memorial Sloan Kettering. It is small, pristine, beautiful. Wendy fought with the FDA for permission to have live plants, which, as you may know, are, because there's allergens among them, they are generally banned in an oncology center or anywhere where you're breaking the skin membrane. But there are a vast array of non-allergenic hypoallergenic plants. And so she overcame sort of generalized rules because she was able to show the efficacy studies that patients recover better, faster with access to nature. And in central New York City, that's a little hard to achieve. So she not only has that, but you can see that she has created sort of a waterfall feature in the doors, which was this is now a chemotherapy room where they've put in a bench on the side for families to visit. They've provided entertainment in the form of a sort of proto iPad on the chair before people were really reliant on their phones.
Your agent should have definitely known about that and should have gotten a copy of that for you.
And the doors, as you can see, were trying to solve a challenge for the patients, which was that they wanted privacy, but they didn't want to feel like they were enclosed in a cell. So those are etched glass that mimic the waterfalls that you'll see outside the door, which also provides a sound effect that muffles the environment. You can see the waterfall is on the glass panel in this screen. And the wait times for this service are 30 seconds tops. She wanted to get to 0, but found that people actually have to sign in legally. But what this facility permits is for you to schedule on an app, for your room to be configured in advance with all of the medications already set, and a nurse practitioner simply comes in and plugs you in for the 20 minutes or amount of time that you're out there, and the room gets swapped out, and the place runs like clockwork. The lessons of this simple exercise were that you have to be very clear with your sponsors about defining what your business goals are. She was clear that the business of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center at its heart is about elevating health outcomes, and her mission as head of strategy is to achieve that. She chose this particular mission for users to eliminate their wait times, and she agreed to the business boundary, which was that this needed to be a reimbursed service and the cost needs to be neutral. In fact, it was net positive extensively because of the low cost of both the low cost of the real estate and the fact that they can cycle people through at a much higher velocity because it's so well scheduled. She also anticipated the cultural inertia and was prepared to battle it. Many other leaders would have failed on this at the very beginning because they would have collapsed in the face of confrontation from the head of the hospital. But Wendy had a passion for solving a problem because she felt her users' pain, and in so doing won the sponsor's commitment. She also made it acceptable for the sponsor because it was low cost, it was a prototype, and it could have been abandoned if it was shown to be failed early in the process. Then she went out and made sure she understood the user's needs. She starts with the patient. What is their pain point? How do I solve it? That's how she came to this aspiration to get to 0 wait times. And in doing so, what she was doing was understanding a lot of people, a small number of people very deeply. Literally understanding real human pain with empathy is more important at this stage in what you're thinking of as generative research, where you're generating the ideas to solve problems, versus later when you do evaluative research. Marketers do evaluative research with focus groups and that sort of thing, seldom if ever used in design thinking because it gives you the wrong inputs. It actually can be very counterproductive. Then you design an optimal solution and recognize that supply follows demand. You are not designing your chemo therapy center in order to see if people like it. You are figuring out what people like, what they prefer, what they desire, where, when, how, and why, and building to serve that need. And you learn and test fast and cheap. You can mock this stuff up in an empty warehouse. You can mock it up in an empty room. There's lots of ways to do this at low cost so that by the time you're spending real money, you know that it's going to be well spent. And lastly, deploy to the market for impact. What you want to do is get to market in a way that costs you very little to begin with, but can scale fast. This is the way invasive species like a coronavirus sets itself in, by coming in under cover of darkness with very low impact and then exploding exponentially once it's successful, which is exactly how venture capitalists invest, looking for bringing you in under cover of darkness in order to be able to get your bearings and refine your business model and then fund it to explode, and you could create, something like Memorial Sloan Kettering could have created something like the Fresenius dialysis centers for chemotherapy on the back of this. And frankly, I'm surprised they haven't. Let me pause for a second and ask what questions you might have about this Memorial Sloan Kettering case. I use it as a very quick case example just to show you kind of the challenge that we face here.
Roger, I just want to say, I've for reasons for family health, I've been to the MSK Center and in Midtown, and it's exactly the way you laid it out.
Great.
They have one of the finest libraries in their lobby, so I've never spent a day bored whenever I visited it. So I can relate to it.
I'm sorry you had to visit it, but I'm glad it was as good an experience as that can be. Yeah, Wendy is heroic to me because she is willing to fight the hard fights that this represents. And I think she would have let this one cost her job. And it could have come to that, I think, if she were not as deft and respected as she was. What you find in design is that it's a cycle of convergence and divergence, which means you go from, at the left side, understanding lots of possible business goals and refining it down to the specific goal you want to solve for. And then you go out and you find user needs in order to create all kinds of opportunities. You translate those from a large number of possible solutions down to the best few, and those you deploy a singular instance and then grow it quickly for impact. If you study design thinking, you'll hear this reference to divergence and convergence because it literally describes the kind of exercise that you find you and your team are going through, where you're focusing for hard decisions and then expanding for possibilities. I'm not going to belabor the text on this. You will have the deck, but I've got a more detailed version after I take you through another example, which I think will make more sense of it rather than just giving you a bunch of definitions up front. I want to tell you about a really fun challenge. It was particularly fun in retrospect because it worked so well. That we did for what was at the time Blue Cross of California. They've since become Anthem Health Insurance. And they had come to us with a pretty clearly defined problem. They said in their market in California, 18 to 34-year-old males were generally uninsured and certainly were deeply underinsured, representing 41% of the people who didn't have insurance. But the difference was that the majority of these were people who should have been well within the target market. They could afford the insurance, they had need for the insurance, they had exposure to risk, but they could not sell insurance to these guys. This is kind of what our sponsor team looked like. It was a room of white guys wearing ties who were all actuarial scientists, meaning they were in the business of quantifying risk. They had tried and failed 3 times to sell to this market. They now literally referred to this segment of young men as the uninsurables. And due to their high risk sensitivity, they found that this was an incredibly appealing market because, of course, like with any health insurance, they're relatively young and healthy, end up funding the rest of us. And they were willing to do one last try when they spoke to us. So we went out to discover the need, but we didn't discover it by asking them. We didn't discover it by looking at data. We didn't discover it by reviewing anything internally. We went out like anthropologists, and in fact, my researchers are PhD anthropologists, to observe our target audience, much like Jane Leakey would observe chimpanzees in the wild. What we have found, what I have learned from my own colleagues is that interviewing people is a very dodgy business because we all lie to each other and to ourselves without meaning to. So in kind of keeping with the notion that actions speak louder than words, watching how people behave is far more indicative of their needs than what they tell you. Because there's kind of a translation that goes on between action and word. And I can take you through, when we have more time, I will explore with you how you go about doing this work. But first we went and observed a series of events where the target audience were putting their health at risk. You may notice that if this is not the actual group that we were observing, but if it were, that group of people, only one of them would have had health insurance. by the ratios that we saw, but they were all practicing a form of health insurance, largely demonstrated by the helmets on their heads. They all understood that they were at physical risk, and they all made efforts to invest in eliminating or reducing that risk. We, of course, went and interviewed them in the context of their own lives. This gets you to a closer truth and contextual settings than you ever get by talking to people in sort of a focused forum or wherever you take them out of context, or by putting them in a room with others where they need to impress each other and they're constantly trying to understand and triangulate their answers based on what other people are saying. And we did a ride along. We went with one young guy from, this was in Southern California. He got on a skateboard and we gave him $200 to go buy health insurance. And so, of course, he pulled out his phone and tried to buy health insurance, and no one allows you to buy health insurance, at least at that time, on your phone. You could make a phone call, but instead he said, I know where I can get it. And he jumped on his skateboard and we literally ran after the guy. We were in a car, followed him down Main Street, and he went to an Allstate office that said insurance and walked in and said, hi, I'd like health insurance. They laughed and said, not only do we not sell health insurance, we don't sell any insurance here. This is a service center. But I have my health insurance with, XYZ. In this case, it happened to actually be Blue Cross, our client. And here's a phone number. So this person went out of their way to kind of help out this kid. And when I say kid, I mean a young man who could pay for himself. The guy called the number. They said, we'd like to schedule a time for someone to come to your home and meet with you, at which point he basically abandoned the sale. It's like, are you kidding? Like, I sleep on my friend's sofa. I'm not having you come over there. And the sale was over. So they couldn't have presented more impediments to his natural inclination for how he was going to engage in this purchase. We also do market analytics to understand what's going on in the world around us. I particularly am enamored of a software product called Quid. It's expensive and it's difficult to use, although they can do it for you. And I have a bit of a bias because I used them so much, I ended up helping them set up their own consulting business. But Quid is basically a large data analytics engine for unstructured data, which means it's like a Google search on steroids. The picture that you're seeing here are 10,000 news articles, or in this case, this is about companies. So this is 10,000 companies where you would literally type in something like a Google search. You might use more Boolean sort of string language to do it more precisely, but effectively, if you were looking for where people were investing in emerging digital health, you would find that, and you could say, and we want you to look at JAMA and New England Journal of Medicine and blah, blah, and we want you to look at only in the United States or only in Australia, et cetera. And it will pull up all the most relevant data sources. You can look at companies, you can look at patents, or you can look at essentially the news that you and I would see on the internet, but you can focus it on different sources. And it will cluster it around the themes that are in the words that are used in these pieces. So it's incredible in that it goes to the heart of these articles and finds that people are, at the bottom right of this chart, you might see healthy nutritional food and supplements. There are a number of people who are investing in creating new businesses around nutritional supplementation, and all of their business subscriptions are being clustered together. Now, I could also light this up and say, show me everywhere that Sanofi is investing. And a small number of these would light up. And show me everywhere that Pfizer is investing. And you'd see them investing in different areas. So you can almost deconstruct the competitive positioning from looking at where people are making their bets. And in more obscure clinical conditions, many of which Regeneron would focus on, this would be incredibly helpful. So we will do a market analysis to make sure that we understand what's going on beyond just the small cohort of our audience. In this particular instance, really what we were doing was looking for other instances where people of this demographic were paying to eliminate risk. And we found it in car insurance, and you found it in a bunch of other areas. And you could go learn from them and say, well, you know what? Car insurance is easy. It's well marketed. You can buy it on your phone. It's transactional. It is simple. It's easy to understand. You can buy small, medium, and large. It is a completely different experience from having some old guy come sit on a couch and interview you like a grand inquisitor. We discovered three other really important things. That among the needs that they did target were vision and dental. Guess what the two things are that almost no health insurance covers? They think of this as a secondary market that they sell off to secondary providers. They don't think of it as their core offer. And the other thing was that many of these people were young enough that they had parents who assumed that their children had insurance but didn't know that they did not, who might have been saddled with some serious expenses if a young person was afflicted with cancer, let's say, and had some kind of long-term care requirement and didn't have health insurance. So in our discovery, we basically boil it down to trying to deeply understand what we started calling the invincibles. What we found among them was they weren't uninsurable. They just viewed themselves as immortal still. So their comprehension of health insurance was that it was complex. The channels where you would purchase it were completely non-intuitive and difficult. There was no way to shop it effectively. So they found it very difficult to understand. Their beliefs were that it wasn't affordable, that they didn't trust they'd get paid. And they also had sort of a latent belief of entitlement because they'd had insurance provided through their childhood, and many of them weren't even aware that they were supposed to be thinking about this. And their behaviors were to procrastinate. It was like almost any other type of budgeting they do. And they, if you have children or are young enough to know these terms, they had this attitude of you only live once, or you're going to be, you've got a fear of missing out, FOMO. My own kids are constantly throwing YOLO and FOMO at me. So they were basically living for today in a way that young, dumb men tend to do, myself having once been such a thing. The guy does have one bit of health insurance going on in his head, though. So we ended up calling our solution Helmet. And what we were trying to do was help our clients in particular understand that this is something that these young people invest in. They invest in health insurance in the form of a helmet. We just need to be like a helmet. We need to be obvious. We need to be valuable. We need to be simple. We came up with these principles. And always when you transition from discover to design phase, you start by saying, what are the principles that will win this market? We have to use familiar channels. It has to be intuitive and simple for them to purchase. In fact, what we found was when we later tested it in this phase was that they needed to be able to make a purchase in under 2 minutes. You imagine doing that with health insurance, especially when you're new to it. We needed to cut out the complexity. It reads like legal documentation with arcane language, not going to work. We need to focus on the risk of accident because that was the one thing that they were sensitive about. They knew intuitively that they didn't know anyone who was suffering from cancer or any other things, but they did know people who knocked their teeth out. So they wanted to know about coverage for that. We also then had to show them that although the risk was low, the occurrence was low, the risk was really high if they did need institutional care. And so we needed to build some sense of the real fear that they should have of that risk and quantify it appropriately. We also found that there were a small number who had insurance and abandoned it because they spent a bunch of money every month for people who didn't have a lot of money and saw no reason to do it because they never needed it. So what can we do to build a benefit into the first year? And lastly, let's market to the parents too, because there's a bunch of parents who are going to be deeply concerned that their kids don't have this insurance when they realize it. They're adult children. What we designed ended up being called Tonic. Helmet itself wasn't available. We always do sort of a branded example, but it's not necessarily what it turns out to be. And Tonic was simple, affordable health insurance that you purchase online. You could do it in under 2 minutes. It was highly simplified. You can see by the indicators on the left, you can compare the plans. You can apply right now. You can apply for healthcare savings. And there were only 3 options. There was the thrill seeker, I can't remember what the other labels were, but you see them listed on the bottom, and you can see how simplified they were to allow you to be able to say, I want this one, here's what it costs me, I'm ready to go. The challenge now is that I'm in a boardroom with that same group of 12 angry men trying to pitch that this is how we're going to solve this problem, using language that they'd never seen before. The legal department is saying, you are kidding me. Like, who are you kidding? Quick quote. What the heck is a quick quote? So our success came down to one pivotal moment, and it was not due to our team, it was due to theirs. We had worked with the chief actuarial's team in order to say, what's the minimum information we need from a person in order to give them insurance? And what we concluded was, with some base demographic information and of course identification, we could insure someone for 30 to 60 days. Well, we got the other stuff that might include drawing blood or urine, et cetera, that you can't do online readily. So you could insure somebody in under 2 minutes if you agreed to that staged approach. So we presented this, and the chief actuarial said, can't be done. In my 30 years of experience, I know for a fact that you need to look a person in the eye for not less than 20 minutes in order to be able to quantify the risk that they represent. And I said, of course, that means then that we need to abandon this project for the fourth time because you're not willing to participate in the way that the market will bear. Would it be possible to insure someone for, say, 30 or 60 days with some base information in principle? Well, yes, it depends what information is available. Here's a roster of questions. If we got their signature to the veracity of these answers, would you be able to insure them for 30 days? And he went through the list. We all sat there, pins and needles, and he begrudgingly said, yes, I could. Now, of course he could, because this was produced by his own direct reports, who knew it to be the case, who were in the room with us, by the way, and were the people who were kind of putting their jobs on the line. And he said, yes, we could do that. And that made all the difference. We then could show them a mock-up of how the website worked and how those questions would allow us to quantify the risk associated with them, what we do to follow up in order to get the rest of the information we needed to write a long-term care plan for them. It ended up launching under this label of tonic and being featured, video's running, stop. Being featured on The Daily Show. This was by Jon Stewart circa 2007, so over a decade ago. And I'm not going to show you the video because that's hard to share over Zoom, but it's also not, this is late night television, so it's not really appropriate for work, but it is hilarious. And you will find the link in your deck. And Arvind, if you can share the PDF I sent you, people can click all the links inside it. And it's about 3 minutes long, no, it's 4 minutes long, and it is hilarious. And it shows our client being interviewed by Ed Helms on the left. Ed Helms was the guy whose tooth was knocked out in the prior image. And Steve Sinnott is a bit of a design hero because he's the chief marketing officer for Blue Cross of California at the time and was the one who really fought for this. And he agreed to this crazy interview with The Daily Show, where they're kind of poking fun at insurance for young people, called Tonic, spelled with a K, because what people care about when they're under 30 is spelling. And so they just took a lot of jabs at it in a very funny way. And his market valuation of that piece was that it would have cost him $50 million to buy advertising to reach his target audience, who is directly the audience that this serves. So that's deploying for impact. And the results were they had 33,000 new customers in year one, which is 4 times what we estimated. They netted $2 million in the first year with a higher margin because they were selling through an online channel, not selling it through agents. So it was lower burden on the agents, lower cost sharing with the agents. It became a key merger asset and produced $1 billion new line of business for them within 3 years. Now, $1 billion in insurance business is a different kind of valuation model than it would be for a biotech business, so don't kind of draw that one-to-one, but it was a huge success and was vital to their sale of Blue Cross of California to Anthem, who's now the owner. The exact same lessons. Define the goal, discover the needs, design an optimal solution from the user perspective, and deploy it to market for impact. In this case, on the left-hand side, the specific business objective was to insure the invincibles. It originated as insure the uninsurables. And in specifying the user objective, we were designing for the needs and behaviors and preferences of our audience, which were all those limiters that you saw. They just do not behave like any prior generation. And this is true for all of us in trying to market to millennials and Gen Z. They have different aspirations, and thank God, because they are largely, in my experience, viewing themselves as responsible for saving the world from my generation. And so most of the ways that they differ from us, I think, are in the interests of humanity. And I thank you if you are among them. In more detail, the methods that we're describing here are to define, discover, design, and deploy. We use these 4 Ds because they're not only descriptive, but a little bit easier for our clients to memorize what we're going through. And so let me just take you through the activity row here so I can explain to you what's going on. We're going to look at the activities and events rows, and I'll talk through both of those rows for each of the 4 phases. When we kick off a project, our primary objective is to agree the goals of the business. Okay, so at this point, we're totally internally focusing. What are we trying to achieve? What does good look like from a senior executive perspective? And we will do a briefing session that produces a single-page project charter. And that project charter defines, from our sponsor's perspective, what good looks like. We want a new offering. Let's use the health insurance example. We want a new insurance product designed for this market, in market, within 9 months, to generate this kind of revenue at this kind of margin. And what I find is really useful about this exercise, and it also says, and here are the resources for it, and the budget, and the time of our people, et cetera, that we're going to make that available. And this gives me the opportunity as their partner to say, well, look, you're asking for a very high risk exercise that you've never been able to accomplish before. And that you're, sorry, let me say it a different way. You're kind of asking for a moonshot. That can be done, but it comes at cost and risk. And I want to quantify with you the cost and risk you're asking for. Because just asking for the upside without recognizing the downside means you're going to get mad at your team, when in fact you should be getting mad at yourself because you didn't think through what you're asking for. So let me help you. When you're asking for this, it's going to cost you $1 million, and it's going to cost you half the time of a team of these kinds of people. It's going to take 9 months, not 6. And when we launch it, it may not work. But we'll know, we'll be pretty close to knowing it works because we'll be testing it and iterating it every step along. Do you agree to that approach? Yes, we do. Okay, now we've got a signed project chart. Then we go into the discovery phase. And the discovery phase is really 2 types of research. It's primary research and secondary research. Primary, where we're studying humans like apes, going out and really interacting with a small number of people in order to understand their needs deeply. And this is called ethnographic research. It is really born of anthropology. And then we'll also do secondary research, which is really desk research, where we're saying, where has this been done before? Where can we learn from history? Where can we learn from outside of this industry? Where are other people winning in selling to this target market? Let's look at how an Apple store works, both on your phone, on your computer, and in a store, to see what they like about that and how could we mimic those things, for example. Once you go through that deep understanding, both of the individuals and the market around you, you go through a synthesis exercise where you bring it all together. When you see design thinking exercises where people are slapping Post-it notes all over the wall, that's this exercise. You're basically saying, here are all the things I learned from this individual. Here's what I learned from this individual. And you start writing all those down on Post-it notes and then slapping them on the wall. And by the way, here's what I learned from market research. Here's what I learned from the Apple store. Here's what I learned from trying to buy car insurance, with Geico. And all of those notes go on the wall, and then you go through a clustering exercise. You can do this with software, by the way, so it is possible to do this work without us all getting in a room together. But effectively what you're doing is you're bundling together all of the needs that are similar. These are all about retail pain points, the difficulty of the purchase. These are all about the complexity of the offering. The audience doesn't understand it. These are all about the perception of this as being unaffordable. So you come up with these thematic clusters, and then you can start to prioritize them about which of these have the greatest impact, which of these are going to basically drive sales of a solution, which of these are most imperative to our users. Like if we had solved them, it really matters in their lives. And let's solve for those. And that's what we turn into design principles. There are two activities that involve gatherings of people in this discover phase. The first is we basically produce a research plan and we review that as a team with our client and our management group all together. And I'm speaking sort of us, them about ampersand working with a client, but if you have these skills in-house, it's your design team working with your executive sponsor team in order to make sure that you keep your 12 angry men on bounds at each stage of this exercise. So you're not surprising them with a solution at the end. And you're saying, here's what we're going to go look for, and here's why. And we'd like your help. Show us everywhere that you found, for example, customers by this demographic profile who have been customers and abandoned us. So we can go talk to them. We will learn so much more. And this is true in every case. We will learn more from the people who have chosen against us than those who are faithful customers. You don't learn much from people who already like you. You learn who like you. You learn from the people who don't. The next meeting is after we get all the findings. We bring our sponsor team together into this insights briefing, the synthesis workshop with all the Post-it notes. And we will have them participate in the review of these clusters, the prioritization of the needs that we're going to solve for, and we often will do kind of a preview of the design phase where we get them involved in ideation. I did a project like this for Boston Scientific in medical devices. And the president of the group, this is peripheral intervention, so the folks who are puncturing your arms and legs in order to put chemotherapy through, they were looking to design a solution that wasn't product-based. What they found was they were competing against Medtronic and at the time Covidien, and increasingly with Chinese competitors who were coming in at lower costs. So they were getting sandwiched by top talent at the one end and low cost at the other. And their president, their CEO of Boston Scientific said, we make more money when we design services than when we do products. I want you guys to take all of your biomedical engineers who are designed, who are purpose-built to come up with products and help us find different solutions. And we were brought in to help them figure out how to do that. And the CEO, in this immersion session, we revealed, I'll actually show you this case in a second, we revealed that clinicians, people who are independent owner-operators of medical clinics, not unlike a chemotherapy center, dialysis center would be a better example, have a real problem with financing their business. There's no bank that does it. The closest you get is banks that give loans for mortgages to dental offices, because the bank knows how to quantify the relative risk of a dentist office. They don't know how to quantify the risk of a dialysis clinic. And so they basically give you onerous rates or make it difficult for you to apply for it. So the CEO said, what if we partnered with our own banks? We're a big company. We have great banking relationships. What if we partner with our banks to bring our target market financing solutions? And now all of a sudden our sales reps who are carrying around a bunch of stents in a bag are carrying around the most important product that this clinician is ever going to see, which is the financing for their business. And so that ended up being one of the three concepts that we ended up prototyping to bring to market. The value of that was that the CEO and all the other executives, including all the people who say no, we had the head of regulatory there. we had the head of finance, we had the head of IT, we had the head of legal, all in the room, all the people who are concerned about risk, coming up with the ideas about the solutions, merrily. It was great fun because then they could see how these concepts were valid and valuable before we even went into designing these solutions. In the design phase, we basically turned those design principles and early concepts into a small list of solutions that fit 3 criteria. They must be desirable, they must be feasible, they must be viable. This is kind of a long-standing lesson in using the application of design theory to produce a new solution. You first must always produce something that's desirable. And we fail on this all the time. We design internally and then take it to market. So we're designing for assumptions that this is desirable, rather than knowing what is desired and designing to meet those needs. If you're designing something that someone doesn't want to buy, you are from day one wasting everyone's time and money. Almost all research that begins without a deep understanding of the true needs in context of your target audience should be canceled, because there's so much risk of a false positive, creating stuff that people don't want to buy. Start with desirable to the consumer. Of course, it has to be technically feasible. So sure, there's lots of good ideas that require, time machines or anti-gravity. So within the bounds of the possibility of, the science and the time frame and the technology and the data and information that's available to you within the time frame of your project, is it feasible, the solution? And lastly, is it viable? Is it economically viable? Will it give us the return on investment that we're looking for? And of course, at the early stage, these are pretty speculative answers. You can test that you can take literally a pencil sketch of a new medication and take it to the patients who will benefit from it and the medical professionals who will be delivering it, and review the efficacy with them and the delivery mechanism and the et cetera, et cetera. And you can find out, yes, this is desirable, although it would be better if it didn't have to be refrigerated and blah, blah. The main lesson here is that what we're doing is designing first for desirable. Once we've nailed that down, then we can kind of ratchet back our aspirations to make sure that it's viable, make sure that it's feasible. Start with desirable, which is kind of an ideal, and then back yourself into what's possible, what's viable economically. And then what you do is you create prototypes, which are, there's an event that happens at this conceive stage where you come up with concepts and then you group them, because many of them would be very similar. There'll be a bunch from the example I just said that were about hoping to solve for finance with our clinicians. So those all get clustered together, and we call this the banking group. And there'll be a number of others that are clustered together that are about the real estate of a clinic and what it requires to be able to penetrate skin and have a building that, as a new owner operator, you don't have an MBA, you weren't trained as a doctor to launch your own business. The hospitals are trying to prevent you from doing it. It's a hard job. I need partners in real estate and finance, not just in the guys who sell me the product. We bring together the sponsor team as well for this exercise in order to go through a ranking of which of these would be the most appealing to the market, which of these would be the most appealing to us. We'll take a small number of those, typically 3 in my experience, and we'll do light prototypes of them, which is a mock-up of, it could literally be kind of a business spec. It could be a sketch on the back of an envelope if it was a physical product. And you begin to start testing those with users at this very low resolution, very low cost way. Get the feedback you need in order to be able to figure out what you need to optimize before you start spending real money. And once you get confidence that you've got something that's really desirable, feasible, and viable, you build out working prototypes at a more expensive cost that you can truly test in market. And to deploy that, you then, you'll have a launch plan that determines whether you're going to launch big because this is a winner and you want to make a splash and you want to differentiate and you want to use it for marketing for the rest of your business, or more likely, you're going to go in quietly in a small target market under the veil of darkness in order to learn everything you need to in market first before you go big. So that would determine whether or not you have a launch event internally or externally for your deployment. And then, of course, you don't go away. You continue to track this thing for incrementally longer periods of time to make sure that it's meeting the hurdles that you've set for it in order to achieve your goals. One other thing I want to tell you is that design thinking is the third row in this pyramid. It's a tactical exercise almost that should follow having a clear growth agenda. And I'm sure Regeneron has sort of a point of view about how we're going to grow and in what areas and what therapeutics, et cetera. That should be translated into a strategy for innovation. So where are we going to invest in creating the new? And then we can start creating, which is what the design thinking exercise is about. Far too often I find people come to me for design thinking because that's become a familiar term, and they haven't done the more important work of saying, where do we need to invest and why? So I will often say, look, we can do a project on a trial basis, but if you're going to do that without knowing your strategy, I want you to be able to answer some very fundamental questions first to make sure we're choosing the right kind of product. The Boston Scientific example, we went after new clinical practices because they realized it was a target market they couldn't serve. They have sales reps who are purpose-built for one rep to go to one hospital and serve broadly, versus one rep going to lots of different clinicians. It was just uneconomic for them because they didn't carry enough product in their bag to make that worthwhile. So they wanted to find solutions to be able to crack into this clinical market, and we did it by adding new products to the bag that were services from other companies through partnership rather than inventing new products, and they were actually more valuable. We had a video of one of the clinicians. When we're out doing the research, we often will video record. And then we'll edit together, splice together comments from the people that are representative of some of the pain points. And we had one doctor who was bragging about how great Boston Scientific's products were. And he's holding up what was a catheter, basically. And it's in kind of a square brown paper envelope. And he's talking about how wonderful it is. And it was a Medtronic product. Because they packaged the thing like it's pornography in brown paper with no branding whatsoever. No representation, and the guy really doesn't distinguish between catheters very much, or stands for, there's only very refined products within that domain that are functionally differentiable. So the innovation exercise of design thinking comes about after you've got a strategy to position it. And then lastly, there's innovation capability. One of the best ways, of course, to learn how to do this and bring it in-house at Regeneron is to do a project and get a team launching on it and working through it the hard way. You can also do what Arvind and I have done together, which is go through formalized education programs like the program at Rutgers. We offer programs like that online and off that basically will give you some skills, but there's, of course, nothing like doing the real projects. And so when I teach it, I do it over a longer period of time and stage, and my students have to solve a problem in the world as in the course of the project. They have to go out and they've got to actually explore real users. I teach a graduate school class at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and the original remit for the course was that you had to pay for your education with our course, which was the first program. It was innovation strategy in a 2-year master's degree. And you'd be amazed at the frequency with which it achieved it. The first year, the guy who won, because it's kind of like a venture pitch at the end, like Shark Tank, they all have to launch their project on Kickstarter and get it funded. That's how you pass the classes, by getting a funded solution. And then you win in the world by having it create value. I am standing at a desk, a standing desk, that was designed by one of the first, literally the first class where I ran this competition. And the guy was an unnaturally tall human being who found that standing desks were either incredibly expensive or incredibly crappy. And he wanted something in the middle that was functional. If I could tear it apart right now, it looks like something IKEA would produce. It's literally planks of plywood with beautifully cut grooves in them, with like rungs on the side like a ladder, and shelves, so you can ratchet it up and down. It's easy, it's tight, it punches in beautifully, so it's really stable. And he funded on Kickstarter. He now owns a factory that ships these things all over the world in a bunch of different wood forms and colors, etc. and he doesn't even work there. He is the head of design for WeWork, as a matter of fact, which was a very commendable job a while ago. So he literally has paid for his education, his retirement, and probably a few other people's, with the result of using basically the design thinking method in order to produce something that was worthwhile. In the PDF that Arvind can send you, you will see links at the bottom of this that shows these services in detail. And it kind of shows you the methodology for how to do it. It's more like a handbook. Also a roster of workshops that are kind of specific modules for different types of design lessons. And then there's also some short videos that you can see where you click video lessons on YouTube that'll show you this egg-shaped person waving their arms around and showing you examples and case studies like this. And included in this are a bunch of references to healthcare design cases that I'm not going to go through with you in the couple of minutes we have left, but they are in there, and you'll see work that we recently did for Advocate Aurora Health in the Midwest, a hospital system, who started with fixing the food experience. It's a fantastic story, and we did it using the sprint method, which meant putting a team in a room for 5 days with a break in the middle for them to go out and do field research, and banged out 3 incredible solutions in a week. A Septoscope happens to be a startup that I'm an advisor to. It happens to be my brother who's funded it, but basically what he's found, he's the CEO of Clendever, which is it serves biotech out of San Diego. And one of the unremediated sources of hospital-acquired infection is the frigging stethoscope. And every doctor knows that it's a problem. Every doctor knows that they're supposed to sterilize, and no doctor can, because to do so, you have to disassemble a thing. You need to own a dozen of them and have them available hanging on hooks, which is exactly what they should be doing. But in the absence of that, he has created the Discover system that basically dispenses a latex Post-it note onto the end of your stethoscope with it in a contactless way at very low cost, less than a penny per touch, so that every patient is protected from every stethoscope, and they'll be mounted next to Purell dispensers all over clinical spaces in the next 6 months. This is the Boston Scientific. Here's the clinical owner, and here are all the challenges that he or she faces in starting their business, in running it, in growing it, and selling it at the end, and creating partnerships, etc. The Embrace is a incubator designed to save millions of lives of premature infants in rural developing locations where mothers giving birth prematurely wouldn't be able to get to a clinical setting. You may have heard this one. I did not have anything to do with this one, but I love this case study because it's been well publicized by Harvard, of Doug Dietz from GE Medical, who used design engineering, used a typical biomedical product engineering approach, and designed a beautiful MRI machine for clinicians, but it was intended for pediatric oncology or pediatric radiology. And he was there for the launch of his first machine, and the child who came into the room to climb into this white sterile cave started screaming. And then the child's parents started crying. And he realized he had failed to take the patient into account at all. He designed the whole thing for the technician. And so they created a totally immersive experience. And if you just Google GE, MRI, pediatric, or something like that, you'll see dozens of different types of settings. This is the undersea version. You've got the tree house. You've got the princess version. All these different childlike settings to make this a less terrible experience for a child who has to hold stock still for them to get the appropriate readings. Recently did a project with Kaiser Permanente to try and help them reduce the burden on primary care physicians, which is a problem everywhere, and they are doing. Kaiser is a really interesting place to study because as both payer and provider, they have the financial incentives that most providers don't to be able to pay for wellness rather than remediate illness. And so they can do a number of leading edge things that I don't find elsewhere in the United States. Lancaster General, which is a hospital that was acquired out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, had us develop their own methodology for design thinking. They had a great quality control group run by a group of nurses, and they didn't have the equivalent for innovation. So we created that with them. We did work with Lifespan, a hospital group out of Rhode Island. Just ran a hackathon at Northwest Memorial. This one's largely in here because the kid holding the check in the red shirt is my older son. He's a freshman at Northwestern, not a medical student. They brought in a very diverse group of students to try and solve a problem when they had people who were architects and med students and law students and MBA students, et cetera, teamed up to try and solve for the challenge that they have running free clinics in really impoverished areas of Chicago. And with Pfizer Consumer, we basically were creating a new way for people to use Sudafed through basically an evaporation technique. I think that's it. Okay. Thank you very much. Arvind, I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, Roger, thanks so much. I think it was a wonderful talk, and I think you demonstrated why personally I've always been a member of the Roger Mader fan club, and I think, you know, thank you for showing design thinking as one of the 4 pieces of the innovation pyramid. And you know, I'm sure there are questions. I'll wait for some questions. I had one, but I'll go last. So if anyone has questions, please. No questions?
Hi, this is Anand here.
Go ahead, Anand.
Yes, Anand.
Quick question on templates. Are there any available templates we can leverage to get started on design solutioning?
Yeah, when I run the program, and Arvind would have seen this at Rutgers, we had a workbook that's kind of a template. I've got, for ampersand, I've got what I consider a much better one that only because it's sort of a fill in the blanks version that marches you through it. I can provide it as a PDF to Arvind to share with whoever's interested. It is something that we sell, but I love Arvind, so it's coming at you. And it's just my version of a workbook. There's so much writing on this subject. One of the competitors that I admire is IDEO. They're a big firm. They've been at it for a long time. They're on the West Coast, but now everywhere. But they've born of, I am skeptical a little bit of folks who are born of product design because they tend to solve in a specific way that's about designing a 3-dimensional object, which can be limiting. They're smart and they do great work in all domains, including services. So I don't mean to be diminishing them, but I do differentiate on the method that we use because it's meant to solve for the solution needs first and the form second.
Hey, Anand.
Roger, can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
Yes, Roger.
Yeah, sorry. So I wanted to just kind of get a sense for what does it take for to kind of really get design thinking to become embedded as part of the culture. I mean, I completed my MBA over at Babson College, very big into the design thinking aspect. And thank you. And it's something that I think it's just such an important aspect of entrepreneurial thinking, but it's also an important aspect of how do we become innovative in the forefront in not just on the science that we do, but on the way that we commercialize.
Yeah. So the answer is as specific as each company that poses the question, because it really is a question of leadership. I have seen Pfizer Consumer, for example. We did a project with Pfizer Consumer that did not show up in this deck that was about nutritional supplementation. They own Centrum, which is the #1 multivitamin. And we did the project to teach them the method. They then bought a series of workshops and trained everybody and their brother in design thinking on the flawed premise that innovation is everyone's job. I would argue that maybe understanding your customer is helpful and everyone's job, but mostly your job is this year's revenues, not next year's revenues and coming up with the next thing. It is a small number of people who are specially tasked and skilled to apply this design thinking. And so this notion of just train everyone widely, what results in a very negative consequence, which is that you're basically setting people up to fail. You're telling them to innovate and then telling them to do their job, which is not innovation. You are telling them to take risks and then punishing them when they take risks because they're not specifically focused on an innovation execution with a specific project brief. So it starts with working with your executive team to say, why do you want this? Where do you want it? What should it achieve? And based on that, it's almost like any other project. You can say, okay, well, here's how you would wed this to the genome of your organization. And you would, you can build it, you can buy it from people like myself, or you can build, buy, or you can ally it. You can literally work with partners to do it. And that should be a deliberate consideration as well. Now, I think every organization needs to be able to create offerings of value. So they need some people, typically in an R&D function historically, who understand this, and most organizations don't. Most of them have R&D folks who are immersed in the science of the solution, not the science of the customer. Maybe they optimize for marketing, who are meant to understand who the customer is, and they bring those two together brilliantly. I almost never see it. It was most of what I was doing for Subway. It was such a simple example. They make frigging sandwiches, but they didn't know enough about their customer that the marketing group knew in order to spend a ton of money on advertising. But the folks designing, a new mustard didn't know. So bringing the product team and the customer teams together is kind of the essence of what we're doing here, except you're making both of them better in the process. You're making your marketing team not about creating an ad, but about understanding a customer and really capturing them for a lifetime and building loyalty programs that matter and are really resonant with the audience. And you've got product designers or offering designers who are equally wedded to understanding and serving the needs of their target audience. As at the same time, you serve the needs, secondarily, the needs of the business, meaning desirable first and then viable and feasible. So there's no great answer to your question because it's unique to each business. I would say within Regeneron, you need to say, where do we have opportunity to serve better, to earn higher returns, to create a more risk adjusted portfolio of offerings, meaning stuff that's low impact, low risk, and high impact, high risk in a reasonable blend. And you basically invest like a venture capitalist does, making lots of small bets in order that a small number of them on the periphery of higher risk, on the basis that a few of them would flourish, and you manage them differently because of that. There's a lot to learn from not just the entrepreneurs, but also the money managers and venture capital. I can send you a blog post about it. I'm going to turn it into a book, but it's the notion that Silicon Valley, and there's similar markets in Tel Aviv and Boston and other places that are hubs of entrepreneurship, are not just about smart ideas. And they're not just about smart money, meaning the people who know how to invest in those entrepreneurial ideas. It's also about smart markets, meaning that they are associated with a major university, they have tax incentives, et cetera. And they also have smart management, smart leadership. And if you use Google or any of the other successful startups that you're familiar with, Amazon, et cetera, you can see how they track through all four of those different domains and how vital that is. So I would want to work with your management team, Roger, to figure out the right way to answer that question for your business, but it would be identify the outcomes you're trying to achieve and then design the muscle in the organization to achieve it.
Roger, I just want to add to what you said, and to some degree it gets to what Roger Bhattacharya and Anand were getting at.
Yes.
There's a reason why I waited 2 years for this presentation, right? And it's a point you just made, which is, I personally think innovation and design thinking takes a lot of courage because it requires leadership. It requires a seat at the table engagement. And it's taken a little while, but I think we have a group that now has the appetite to do that. And so one of the things we are going to be looking to do is we want to establish an innovation and design mindset.
Great.
So we will be making that available in some form, and you and I will have further conversations on that. The other reason I think it's very interesting for us is as a company, we're very different. We're very patient focused to start with. We're very innovative because of the science. And it's always been a priority at Regeneron, right? So this is very, very timely. And I'm really, really happy you made the time for this. And it was just an excellent talk. And I just want to applaud you for that.
Thank you very much. I want to applaud all of you for giving me time out of your homes to hear about it. And I am, Arvind, if you want to give my email address to folks, I'm happy to continue to answer questions, etc. Or I can channel everything through you in order to keep it organized. But Arvind, I will commit to sending you a different PDF that is the workbook template that I think it was Anand was looking for you to be able to share with the group.
Perfect. I will do that, Roger. And my last comment is Subway makes one hell of a veggie delight. So don't ever change that.
You're right. They do. Thank goodness. And although the preparation is abysmal, their salads are quite good.
Okay. Any other questions or we'll call it a day?